Welcome.
Mr. President, welcome to this place. Thank you for making the time after such a long day of talks for addressing our public here. We're eager to listen to your message and to hear what you think about our partnership, a long-time partnership, 50 years between the EU and the Philippines, and we've been progressing. You have an impressive political career as a lawmaker, as president. You've been also extremely instrumental in making peace in your country with some of the problematic parts. And you've been a very active mover of the reforms in your country, which make the Philippines now one of the fastest, if not the fastest, growing economy in Asia. We are proud as Europeans to have been part, a little bit of that, both in the Mindanao process, but also in the economic department. So we are also very aware of the importance, the growing importance of your region for our interest. So we are keen to hear what your vision is. Again, thank you, and thank you for bringing the Indian summer with you. You have the word.
Yes. Thank you, Ambassador Audit. Members of the Philippine delegation, representatives from the Belgian government, the European Council, the European Commission, and European Parliament, excellencies from the diplomatic corps, representatives from various policy think tanks, members of the academe, business community, international organizations, and civil society, or guests, ladies and gentlemen, I almost said good afternoon, good evening. In our part of the world, 6 o'clock is normally dark. Now it's 7 and it's still very light. Anyway, I stand today in a country that has helped shape much of world history. Many of history's most crucial battles were fought here, unfortunately. Of course, the Battle of Waterloo, which occurred just a few kilometers, I understand, from here. Furthermore, 100 years ago, now the beginning of the First World War, neutral Belgium was invaded largely due to its geographic location. The people of this land, however, have always responded to such adversity by rising to the challenge. The bravery they displayed a century ago as they fought back against the invaders inspired the Allies to resist aggression. Having experienced the scourge of conflict in 2 world wars, one can see why since the end of World War II, Belgium has played a major role in some of history's largest joint efforts to guarantee collective peace and security. In 1948, the world witnessed the signing of the Treaty of Brussels, which formed the foundation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Belgium's support for peace and cooperation has lasted until the modern era. The proof is all around us here in this great city of Brussels, which has become the heartland of the European Union. In my part of the world, Southeast Asians too are working closely to build a community of nations that work together to achieve security, peace, and prosperity for its peoples. And I'm proud to say that my country, the Philippines, is playing an increasingly prominent role in this regard due to our country's resurgence. Before my term in office, the Philippines was mired in a vicious cycle of corruption, deceit, and negativism. Some people had grown so apathetic that it seemed that the only ambition left for them was to leave the country to look for any opportunities. Despite this, the previous administration had the temerity to claim credit for continued growth, which was actually fueled by Filipinos who were working abroad. Some called that period a lost decade, a massive opportunity squandered by a government that instead of laying foundations for growth, focused on political self-preservation. Its impunity only deepened the fissures in our society. Our greatest fear was that the country's downward trend would continue with no end in sight. But please never discount the will of the Filipino people. In May of 2010, during the presidential elections, they made a resounding statement. The systematic pillaging of state coffers must end, and government must go back to serving its true bosses, the Filipino people. Thus, they flocked to the polling stations and voted for the simple idea that was the lifeblood of our campaign and the driving force of our administration. And it was encapsulated in a slogan which, in translation, says, "Where there is no corruption, there will be no poverty." From day one, we have worked overtime to fulfill this promise. Our job was to prove to our people that government is truly on their side. we began relentless reform efforts. We overhauled our budgeting system, implementing zero-based budgeting. This meant reviewing all government programs, making sure that each and every peso in the national budget goes towards bringing tangible benefits to our people and ensuring that there is direct causation between government's investments and the end results. Failing this criteria, these projects were abolished. We created new channels through which people can take a greater part in public life, such as websites like Pera ng Bayan and Budget ng Bayan, which translate to the people's money and the people's budget, respectively. These sites have allowed our people to report suspicious officials to the Department of Finance and to review how government spends taxpayer money. Through these, along with countless other efforts at greater transparency, we empowered our people to rejoin the collective task of governance. Of course, these initiatives would be meaningless if government did not possess the political courage to go after those who have erred against the people. I am proud to say that we have stood firm in this regard. We have our anti-corruption programs, amongst them the Revenue Integrity Protection Service, or RIPS, which is designed to ensure that revenue collectors perform their duties properly. The Run After Smugglers, or RATS program, and the Run After Tax Evaders, or RATE program, whose names are all self-explanatory. These have led to the filing of 536 cases against individuals who allegedly committed offenses as of July 12, 2014. Through the help of like-minded reformists in Congress, we were able to impeach an ineffective ombudsman and replace her with a person of unquestionable moral integrity. Our Congress and Senate also succeeded in removing from position a Chief Justice who failed to declare 98% of his assets in his formal statement of assets, liabilities, and net worth, which is a clear violation of our Constitution, which he was supposed to protect. My predecessor as well is under hospital arrest as she faces 2 serious unbailable charges, with another one still being reviewed by our ombudsman. In short, we made it clear, under our administration, one's position, wealth, and influence do not enter into the equation. Justice and the rule of law will be upheld. Our commitment to the rule of law is evident not only in our domestic dealings. Many will find it consistent with the stance we have taken on the international level regarding the dispute on the sea known by many names in our part of the world, or what we call the West Philippine Sea. We maintain that we must pursue a solution that adheres to the rule of law and one that maintains peace and freedom of navigation in the region. In fact, I would like to note that our emphasis on the rule of law has helped reinforce the principle of ASEAN centrality. In the chairman's statement of the 24th ASEAN Summit a few months ago, our region was unanimous in expressing serious concerns over ongoing developments in the South China Sea. We also reaffirmed the importance of fully implementing the 2002 Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea and emphasized the need for the expeditious conclusion of a binding code of conduct, again in the South China Sea. Such developments redound to the benefit not only of the Asia-Pacific region, but of the international community as well, considering that one estimate puts 40% of world trade as traversing this particular sea. Ensuring that the rule of law is respected in one part of the world redounds to a global order informed by fairness, equality, and a sustainable harmony that can only contribute to stability in all of our regions. Whether externally or in the domestic realm, the effects of our commitment to justice, rule of law, and good governance have been profound. It has expanded our coffers, which allowed us to double down on our investments in our greatest resource, namely our people. One look at our budgets from 2010 to 2014 tells a compelling story. In that time frame, the budgets of our social welfare, health, and education departments have been increased in multiples. They have been empowered both quantitatively and qualitatively so that they in turn empower our people. The results of these strategic increases have been stark. The households who are beneficiaries of our conditional cash transfer program. This program gives poor families cash grants as long as children are sent to school, vaccinated, and pregnant mothers undergo regular health checkups, have risen from less than 800,000 households to more than 4 million households. We improved our national health insurance system as well. Over the course of our administration, the program has expanded to cover almost 80 million Filipinos as of April 2014. It also covers more diseases, particularly those found to have the most catastrophic effects on Filipinos. We also ended our inherited classroom backlog, which amounted to 66,800 units, not to mention the inherited backlogs as well in textbooks and school seats. All of this we made possible and sustainable with prudent financial management. These programs were designed with the long term in mind. They paved the way to a populace that is healthier, more educated, and more equipped to take advantages of the opportunities that are becoming increasingly available. At the same time, however, the immediate effect of our programs has also been apparent. For instance, from 2012 to 2013, they have helped 2.5 million Filipinos lift themselves above the poverty line. This has allowed government to now also focus on the sector deemed near poor. Once our emphasis had been on those living under the poverty line, but now we are capacitated to address those who have barely moved out of the poverty line. The end in sight, pushing them as far away as possible so that a single medical catastrophe or natural disaster does not condemn them to poverty once more. These are only few of our accomplishments, but from these alone, it is clear good governance is making waves across the archipelago. These developments have infused the Philippines with a newfound vitality. It can be felt in the optimism of the common Filipino, in the hope they rediscovered in themselves and in their country, and in the confidence of the business community in our economy. Look at our GDP growth numbers. From 2006 to 2009, our average growth was at 4.3%. But from 2010 to 2013, it has risen to an average of 6.3%. The difference is more impressive when one considers that the 4.3% growth average back then was largely consumer-driven. It means that it was caused mostly by Filipinos spending money, a lot of which was sent back by overseas Filipino workers. This meant that our economy was highly vulnerable to shocks, not just in our own country, but in the host and receiving countries as well. This is why, over the course of our administration, we have worked to regain control of our economic destiny. We have made early strides in making the Philippines' growth more investment-driven, which is more sustainable. We have likewise steadily climbed several global measures of competitiveness. For instance, in the World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Report, we have gone from 85th in 2010 to 52nd in 2014, making us the most improved country since 2010. In the same period, we improved our ranking in the World Bank and the International Finance Corporation's Ease of Doing Business report by 36 spots. On top of all of this, in 2013, all of the world's most renowned credit ratings agencies, despite being more conservative, were unanimous in declaring the Philippines investment grade. Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to say to all of you, the Philippines is well and truly back in business. Might I add, this is only the beginning. In many different sectors, we see the foundations for continued and accelerated growth moving into the future. For instance, the reforms instituted by the Civil Aviation Authority of the Philippines, together with the cooperation of our local carriers, helped the Philippines pass a European Union air safety audit. Now our carriers have once again been allowed to fly directly to Europe. Without doubt, this unlocks many more potential synergies between us, whether on the cultural or economic level. The transformation from the apathy of the past to the optimism that what we cannot achieve now, we can achieve shortly, has never been more apparent. I remember during our first few months in office, as we unearthed the details of the problems we would have to confront and solve. Everyone in the cabinet looked forward to the weekend, a period when they could at least breathe again before discovering even more problems come Monday. We have come so far from that attitude, and now whenever confronted with a problem, somehow we see constantly the opportunities these problems also brings. Let me give a concrete example. Ours is a country visited by an average of 20 typhoons per year. In December of 2012, a province in the south named Davao Oriental was badly damaged by Typhoon Bofa. It brought down coconut trees, which were the principal source of income for our farmers there. The problem was those trees take 5 to 7 years to grow back. From the combined efforts of government and the private sector, we introduced intercropping for these farmers. They were taught to grow chili, which grow within 3 months. This is really icing on the cake. A hectare planted to chili necessitates an investment of about 95,000 pesos per year in that particular area. and produces a gross of 200,000 to 250,000 pesos. This results in a net income for investment of 95,000 of over 100,000 pesos for 1 hectare per growth cycle. Again, that is the net proceeds. The same land planted to coconut would have produced only 20,000 pesos per annum. So one can only imagine just how big an impact these efforts have had on those farmers. And it solves the issue of livelihood while waiting for the coconut trees to reach maturation. Our reforms have also given us the wherewithal to prepare for and cope with natural disasters. Our country knows fully well the value of readiness. After all, the storms we have encountered in recent years have been becoming more intense and frequent. Thus, from the moment we assumed office, we took on projects to minimize the threat of the new normal of climate change. We acquired Doppler radars to improve our rainfall estimates. We launched Project NOAA, or the Nationwide Operational Assessment of Hazards, which involved installing hundreds of hydrometeorological devices across the archipelago, allowing us to track changes in weather patterns in real time. And we used LiDAR technology to produce strategic maps of our floodplains and river basins, among other initiatives. Nevertheless, Typhoon Haiyan, recognized as one of the greatest storms and strongest storms in recorded history to ever make landfall, proved the need to continue traversing the road to full preparedness. The strength of the storm was something we had never seen before. It swept away a good chunk of the goods we had pre-positioned as relief goods. It also swept away the heavy equipment and transportation equipment needed for relief and recovery. It even affected many of our first responders, including our Secretary of Defense and our Secretary of Interior and Local Government, who went to the area even before Haiyan made landfall. It ended up devastating 44 of our 81 provinces and affecting millions of our countrymen. Indeed, without the help of our friends in the international community, such as the European Union, our path to recovery would have been far more challenging. Filipinos never forget moments of kindness, and thus, on behalf of my countrymen, I thank all of you, the Kingdom of Belgium and the members of the European Union alike, for your assistance in one of our country's darkest hours. Your help has allowed us to undertake our mission to end the cycle of destruction and reconstruction sooner rather than later, which we are doing by building back better communities, ones that are more resilient in the face of disaster. I also thank you for monitoring and recognizing our recovery efforts. We remember during the Asia-Europe meeting, Manila Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction and Management, which was co-hosted by the EU, Japan, Switzerland, and the Philippines, the Honorable Kristalina Georgieva, EU Commissioner for International Cooperation, Humanitarian Aid, and Crisis Response, gave a heartfelt recollection of her visits to Tacloban, one of the areas most damaged by Typhoon Haiyan. She said that during her visit, she was, and I quote, terrified by the devastation, close quote. But during her return, she was relieved to see, and again I quote, not ruins, but shiny roofs of houses rebuilt, close quote. And finally, people who have taken their lives back in their hands. She also went on to praise the strength and the resilience of our people. Without doubt, my country will continue to channel the kindness we have received back to the world. We have always believed that in this increasingly shrinking globe, no man is an island, which is why, to our own limits, or within our own limits, we have been taking every opportunity to help improve the world we share. For instance, we sent medical teams to Japan in the wake of the earthquake of 2011. Our personnel are also still present in the Golan Heights and in Liberia and in other areas. Note that these troops are needed to address our own challenges back home. But even then, we believe that this should not keep us from completing our own commitments. We are also adding our voice to the immediate need of addressing global climate change. This year is the 50th anniversary of the Philippines and the European Union's relations. It brings me great pleasure to see so much evidence that these bonds we have fostered run deeper than just diplomacy. What we enjoy is a bond of humanity between our peoples, and I cannot help but see this as an opportunity for us to gather our strengths, compensate for each other's weaknesses, and take greater steps forward in addressing the new normal of climate change together. During her visit to the Philippines a few months ago, the EU High Representative Baroness Catherine Ashton said that the EU wished to strengthen political dialogue with the Philippines and to turn the relationship into a more strategically rounded partnership. This is a desire we share. The foundations of a stronger and more successful partnership are there. Your region and my country share important core values: the rule of law, democracy, inclusive growth, and the protection of human rights, including the rights of those who might not be from our respective countries, such as migrants or migratory workers. To our friends in the European Union, with the Philippines being stronger, more unified, and more hopeful than ever before, there is no better time for us to build the strategically rounded partnership that the Baroness proposed. I say this not just in the sense of the Union as a whole, but in terms of our connections with even the individual partner nations within the EU. Our cultures and our religions normally talk about caring for our fellow man. Does it not only make practical sense that in the pursuit of growth, we also necessarily count on the growth of our partners? Hence, regardless of where we are in the stage of the development, even with our limited resources, we must help one another. We must live out the phrase, "There is no letter I" in the pronoun we. We live in a world challenged by pandemics, by cross-border terrorism, and by climate change. We cannot address this on the individual level, on the community level, or the regional level alone. We must do this on a global level. The choice is clear. Together, we can confront and overcome these challenges together, or we can succumb to them individually. I invite all like-minded people, communities, and nations to join us. Let us combine our strengths with yours. Let us share lessons with one another, and together accelerate our pursuit of the goal of improving everyone's lives. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It was a very encouraging speech and a call for cooperation, and you certainly carry the hope of your people to be part of the international community. I note with a lot of interest the time you spent on talking about climate change, because the Philippines have been one of the worst affected victims of climate change, and thank you for underlining the necessity for a global governance about that. And I think you're right to underline that everybody is concerned. There's no small and big countries in that respect. There's only humanity working together for a better future. So the President has accepted to take a few questions. We have limited time, so if you could keep your questions short and identify yourselves so we can give some time for that. Yeah?
Mr. President, thank you very much for these very interesting words about the achievements in your country. My question would be related to ASEAN and the future of ASEAN, because you spoke about cooperation, and ASEAN is of course the unique example in Asia of regional integration. After 40 years, ASEAN is a real economic bloc between India and China, and facing Korea and Japan. But the challenge of 2015 and beyond will require probably more further integration. How do you see and which steps do you see needed for this further integration? Thank you.
The levels of development, ma'am, within the ASEAN are varied. You have very advanced first world countries like Singapore in particular. You have more developed countries than the Philippines in the persons of Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia. You have less developed countries that I will not mention lest I commit a diplomatic faux pas. But the bottom line is this. I think even at this point in time, we have just signed agreements, for instance, to ensure the availability of rice, which is our staple in the Philippines, provided by the strengths of both the Thai and the Vietnamese agricultural sectors. So there is, I think, intense willingness to impart areas where there is strength from one member nation to areas where there is weakness in the other. We in turn are being asked, for instance, to help provide NGO workers, English literacy experts. We develop also the agricultural sector of other countries dependent on their request. Now, the problems we face are common. Tensions with the bigger brothers in the region, the effects of global climate change. We belong to some of the worst clubs in the world, the Ring of Fire, for instance, the Typhoon Belt, and so on. The lessons learned by one are immediately transferable to the lessons that can be learned and utilized by the other states. I actually kidded in one of my first ASEAN meetings the rest of the brothers when I told them, the Philippines stands at the gateway from the Pacific Ocean to the rest of ASEAN. And the Philippines gets 20 typhoons. Vietnam was saying we only get 10. Then I said, perhaps the Philippines should charge you for blocking the 10 that didn't reach. Okay. Now, it is true. There are, we tend to work on a consensus basis. It takes a lot longer to have consensus rather than to impose one's will on the other. But at the end of the day, consensus breeds, how should I put it, voluntarism and an independence that nurtures the growth of the individual states, and at the same time makes the decision to commit that much more wholehearted and will have better roots. So having said that, again, from our perspective, each country has their own respective strengths and weaknesses, and prosperity has to be prosperity for all. Anybody who's left behind becomes the new source of tension for the rest. And I think that is a common perspective shared by the entire community within ASEAN.
Thank you. Suzanne?
It's the privilege of standing in the back. My name's Teresa, though that's why I was confused. My name's Teresa Fellon. I'm with the European Institute of Asian Studies. Thank you, Mr. President, for your presentation. Many people in this room today attended the ASEAN event, and I know it's looking forward 1 month from now, but on the sidelines, some were mentioning perhaps some sort of statement about the South China Sea. Would you like to see something like that? And how do you envision, my second point, Europe cooperating with you on rule of law issues in the South China Sea? Thank you.
Well, of course, we will welcome such a statement, and there have been previous statements seeking for an adherence to international law and to resolve disputes in a peaceful manner. And that those are perfectly in sync with the positions that the Philippines has raised. Now, we understand that the EU is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, trading partner of our big brother to the West. Of course, the opinion matters. The opinion of the biggest market has to influence the decisions of the seller. So your push, as opposed to being quiet about the situation prevailing in the South China Sea, adds its own measure of a push towards solving it, again, based on international law and based on a system of rules and, again, perhaps an adherence to the commitments that have already been undertaken by the world, especially UNCLOS in this particular matter. Doing the reverse, being quiet, might embolden adventurous sorts to continue trying to push the envelope as to what they can get away with. Now, an estimate tells us that at least 40% of world trade has to traverse this particular sea. And if the situation changes, how does one have any source of stability which is necessary for any prosperity or growth to continue? So I guess it's in everybody's interest that we really live in an increasingly smaller globe, and we do have to learn, hopefully, how to live with one another in, so to say, less contentious actions, or through less contentious actions. And again, we welcome the EU's support and help if indeed more statements to the effect of resolving it in peaceful dialogue and adherence to international law do come about. Thank you, madam.
Thank you. Gentleman in the back. One more, okay.
Jacques Pelkmans from SEPS. Mr. President, you are talking about the partnership, and the partnership is now 50 years old. But beyond the partnership, there have been informal talks about a free trade agreement with the Philippines. there is nothing formal and official, at least as far as I know, although there have been scoping papers exchanged, so the technical preparations are there. Can we look forward to, as some other ASEAN countries are already negotiating with the EU, negotiating with an FTA with the Philippines?
But we are in the process of negotiating this. There is the, I have to be precise with the particular phrase. Formal scoping, my Secretary of Trade tells me, begins at the end of this year. It takes another year. We're after the GSP Plus privileges also. We're hoping we qualify for the same. That comprehensive PCA. The Partnership and Cooperation Agreement is supposed to be up for ratification, passing through all of the members. But perhaps I can end the answer in this manner. When I was growing up, there were a lot of European products on our shelves. For instance, something as simple as eating pizza that was homemade back home, which was one of the delights. No? At one point in time, suddenly it was no longer produced by our kitchen, and I asked, what happened? It's my favorite. And they said, none of the ingredients are present anymore. No. Now, the decision makers in our country are of the age that they did experience all of the products from Siemens in electronics to Dunlop, for instance, for tires to etc. I might be accused of plugging so many products, but the bottom line is there has been a marked absence in our markets. Now, in this trip where we have been talking to various business delegations, the synergies between those who have skills, finances, experience, etc., and the needs that we have as a country, especially in the public-private partnership projects, seem to indicate that there is tremendous potentials for all of us to benefit from the resurgence of the economy. And I think it behooves all parties concerned to really accelerate the process of gaining the free trade agreements. And I will be reminding our respective ministers that they are authorized to visit Europe more than once a year to accelerate the process. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. One last question? Yes, we can. Okay.
Please, can you pass it on? I'm Johan of Intel. That's a movement of international solidarity here in Belgium. And I thank you, Mr. President, also for noting that human rights is high on your agenda in the Philippines. So my question is concerning that. While I admit also that if you compare with the last president, the human rights violations have gone down. Sadly enough, it hasn't stopped. Just to name some numbers, since your presidency in 2010, more than 200 activists have been killed. A couple of activists, 20-some activists disappeared, and also 200, I think, are still imprisoned and still waiting for trials. And also at the same time, 26 journalists have been also
Could you make it
killed.
short, please? Because
Yes.
the President knows the figures.
Yes, my question is, what is your point of view regarding that, for example, Oplan Bayanihan is considered as a circumstantial evidence of endangering these people, activists, doctors, lawyers working for the people? That is my question.
Well, those are blanket statements, sir, and we don't necessarily agree with them. Perhaps, let me answer it anecdotally. For instance, one of the foremost human rights violators, or accused, or alleged human rights violators, in the person of General Palparan, who used to be a member of our armed forces, has recently been arrested and is presently incarcerated and undergoing trial for the specific action of two student activists that were supposed to have disappeared under his care. Now, in terms of so-called media killings, it is, and other human rights abuses alleged on our government, it is not our policy to encourage or even abet any transgressions of the law. And towards that end, we have been investigating all of these allegations. We have, I'm sorry, I'm trying to bring out all of the necessary information in a natural sequence. For instance, in the media killings, some who used to work in media died. Did they die because they were investigative journalists? Were they exercising their profession in a responsible manner, in living up to journalistic ethics? Or did they perish because of other reasons? Now, in our culture, when somebody dies, one does not talk about his own transgressions, no? that were not necessarily related to the job. And in the absence of our stating what happened in a particular case, it is assumed that that which is being propagandized is the actual reason for a person's demise. And I have caused a review of this particular policy. It has to be, we have adopted a policy that the only deterrence to crime is the certainty of punishment. So when we narrate all of the commission of the crime, the solution of finding the culprits of those who committed the crime and putting them behind bars, it has to be a complete narrative so that our people are assured that the correct people were judged, judged and were first arrested, then judged, and then brought to jail. Now, I don't know if we will have, we should talk about the numbers. From 2001 to June 2010, I took office in June 30 of 2010. There were recorded or validated media killings of 39. From those happening from my assumption into office, another 15, a total of 54. Now, cases with conviction have already numbered 10, and most of this were for those crimes that were done before I assumed into office. We have instituted a task force, primarily whose primary mission is to take cognizance of all of these extrajudicial killings or alleged extrajudicial killings, with the end in view of arresting every culprit, regardless of whether it was a media individual, an activist, or any other individual. Bottom line is, you commit a crime in our country, there has to be certainty of punishment, and that is the focus. Now, in our system also, the judicial branch is not directly under my office. We operate on 3 separate branches. And for instance, the so-called Maguindanao massacre is also a source of frustration for the executive department. There are 58 counts of homicide and murder in that particular case, and over 100 accused. And we're still in the process of arresting some of the others accused. Now, we have an adversarial system of justice, and it takes such a long time to be able to present the personal circumstances to accuse each one of a specific action. And the wheels of justice would hopefully move faster than what they are doing now. Now we're trying to do our utmost to advance the solution of all of these crimes. But we do have to work with the tools that we have on hand.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm afraid that's all the time we have because of the rest of your schedule. Thank you for the candid observations. Thank you for giving us the perspective and opening up really the way for deeper and increased relations with Europe. Your country is very important to us bilaterally, to Europe, and you will leave with our encouragement to continue the path you've taken since you're assuming the presidency. Thank you very much, and once again, a big applause.